Will the Bears spend enough money to get the best possible head coach? Ben Johnson's reportedly wanting a lot of dough. Erik Kramer, the former Bears quarterback, has thoughts for you on this topic and many more in just a couple of moments. I want to tell you a little bit about the Bet Rivers same game parlay. They are, doggone it. All right, third time's a charm. 3, 2, and 1. Will the Bears dig deep enough to get the head coach who is best qualified to lead Caleb Williams into his second, third, fourth, and hopefully many more years? Former Bears quarterback Erik Kramer addresses that in just a couple of minutes. You're going to love what he has to say about the Bears offense, about when it went off the tracks this year. It was far earlier than that Thanksgiving Day date in Ford Field against the Lions. We're brought to you, as always, by Bet Rivers. It's the Bet Rivers Danny Mac podcast, and if you like wagering on college and pro ball, let me tell you a little bit about the same game parlay at Bet Rivers. You pick 2 or more from within the same game, and if you hit, you earn squares that are worth bonus bets, profit boosts, and jackpots of up to $10,000. Enjoy it like I did last week, and a winner paid 2 to 1. It's the same game parlay from Bet Rivers.
You're now watching the Danny Mac podcast on the Bet Rivers Network.
It's the Bears and Seahawks Thursday night, but really most of the attention right now is what's going to happen in the upcoming offseason. Welcoming Erik Kramer, the single-season Bears passing leader, back to the Danny Mac podcast. Man, these games are just, they're tough. I mean, even for not an ardent fan, it's tough to watch a team just scuffle the way they have, isn't it?
Well, it's like anything bad. I mean, if you go watch a bad movie, you know in the first 5 minutes you're going to waste the next 2 hours unless you get up and leave. So, yeah, it's a tough watch right now. I think me and probably many of us after the first few games thought, all right, things are moving in the right direction. And then the train just went off the cliff.
Yeah, it sure did. Is there a bad movie? I do anything I can to not talk about the offensive line. Is there a bad movie that you can't get out of the way of, that you, anytime you see it, you're like, okay, I'll watch some of this because it's that bad?
Okay, so here's I haven't seen a lot of movies lately, but the one I have seen is Gladiator 2. And I walked out of there going, what is the point of that? That's like, the guy does he need that money that badly? I mean, come on.
Wild Things is on in the middle of the night a lot, and I know every guy loves.
Book when I was a kid, by the way.
Was it really?
Yeah.
I didn't.
It's like a picture book, but it had maybe a sentence on each page.
Okay, with pictures of Denise Richards, hence the popularity of the film. Yeah, a local girl, by the way. Right. What is most important for Caleb Williams these last 2 weeks heading into an off season?
Well, I think we saw glimpses of it this past week. And that's just, to put it in simple terms, it's getting your feet and eyes to work in tandem with each other, in concert, so fluidly through the progression. And we've seen that at times throughout the year. It's just that when it doesn't clear up, here's the number one golden rule. When people are covered, they don't get open the longer you stare at them. And that's what happens. And then I think the other thing is, we saw it this past weekend, is that the first 4 series went like this. It was some sort of combination of a penalty, which forced a 3rd and long, which forced a punt, or a fumble. In those same 4 possessions, the Lions scored, each of them, 20-0, pretty much game over. And we haven't even, that was the first series into the second quarter. Yeah. And then the Lions, then the Bears play catch up the rest of the way. And that's what they do every game. And so just when you're good offensively, you're just, as a quarterback, you're a cog in the system. And you just do your job like everyone else does their job. But if you're efficient when you do it, you get less sacks, you get hit less, people catch the ball, they move the chains, first downs eventually become touchdowns. And it doesn't matter if it's the first, second, third, or in his case, 4-3, which might just be run.
I want to ask you about the previous Detroit game because it still is something, that Thanksgiving Day loss, that people are gnashing teeth over.
Yeah.
And the end result is Matt Eberflus getting fired, and I I didn't know why they brought him back initially, so I thought, okay, you're finally cutting ties with him, but I didn't hear much finger pointing at the quarterback, who was very gentlemanly after the game. He said maybe there will be a time I get to in my career when I'll take the time out if necessary. Well, if it's going to cost you a ball game, apologize later. Take it now, man. I mean, wasn't that some of that on him too? Yet nobody talks about it.
I don't know what the arrangement was, right? So everybody in the world watching the game could see that with 30 plus seconds to go, call timeout. Okay, first of all, don't hold the ball for 18 seconds while you're taking a sack. That's number one. Number two, get on. They could have run 4 plays in 32 seconds at least, and they run one, which was a disaster. And so I think I know your question relates to Caleb Williams, but let me answer this part first. As you alluded to with Matt Eberflus, if you just take this season, he should have been fired after the Washington game. And okay, then it doesn't. Then it keeps going and going and going, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And then that was the last straw in Detroit, not the first one. And which, as you mentioned, this could have been done last year. And it just hard for me to understand that a guy that speaks like accountability has none for himself. And back to Caleb Williams, yes, I'll guarantee you he thought to take a timeout, guaranteed. But in your first year, you rehearse these things throughout the week, by the way. It's like every practice, Wednesday and Thursday, ends with at least 2 or 3 2-minute drills, at least. And so for Matt Eberflus not to be prepared with a timeout, he's standing 3 feet from the referee. And all head coaches call their own timeouts whenever the hell they want to. So again, I will guarantee you Caleb Williams had the thought to call timeout. But I think this goes back to partly why Matt Eberflus got fired is who doesn't communicate that? Like going into a game, Caleb, if we got 30 seconds to go and we're on the X yard line and we've got a timeout left, use it. If I don't call it, you call it. You got all week and all off season to go through all these things, and it's just it's almost like you shake up a snow globe, right? And wherever it trickles down, that's what we'll do.
Who would you like to see succeed Matt Eberflus?
It's a great question. The hot name out there is Ben Johnson, the coordinator for the Lions, and I think going back a few weeks, he made a comment like, okay, for me to even consider something right now, first of all, I'm enjoying the season because he went through the losses in with the Lions himself. So, but I think he put the onus on the teams. Like, okay, before you ever talk to me, clean up your own act and acknowledge publicly what your part in your own act has been. And that's potentially why I think he wouldn't come to Chicago. Because I wonder obviously, when's the last time the Bears have come out as an organization and said, okay, everybody, we really screwed this up. And now we've put this in place and this in place to ensure that never happens again. That's never going to happen. It's never happened. It's never going to.
No, they go into the bunker. They've been in the bunker for several weeks.
Yeah, so years, 40, probably 50, who knows? But I'm just like, whatever there is to get wrong, they get wrong.
Well, I think money's going to be an issue too. It's not been their habit to pay a lot of money for coaches. And I think as coaches' salaries escalate, you got to pay up, man. I mean, there's reasons why Mike Tomlin and others are making more than 15 million a year. When you piss away money on free agents, knowing you're going to lose money because some guys are just stopgap guys and you're going to over bonus them to get them on the roster for a year or two. Why not spend 15 million on a good head coach? Look at the division. Look at the young minds in the division, EK, with O'Connell and LaFleur and Campbell. Man, you got to play at that level. Pay up, right?
Not only pay up, but okay, here's how the Bears screwed up again. So I think they end up getting a great young general manager in Ryan Poles first. Then they go get Kevin Warren second. Why?
Yeah.
So you've got what was looking to be a really good hierarchy of chain of command and thought, whatever. And then you just throw a boulder in the middle of all that. And so how you're going to now come up with a head coach, as you mentioned, yeah, you got to pay up, but you got to go about the process of identifying and collaborating on who that person or a couple people are. And I'm not sure they can do that. And you're right. There is, to me, when you found the right guy, there is no such thing as overpaying.
Let's talk a little bit about the record that Caleb Williams is chasing. And I always got a kick out of Phil Simms, who holds the record for completion percentage in a Super Bowl. He was 22 out of 25 when the Giants beat the Broncos in Super Bowl 21. And he always said afterward, a lot of people gave it to him for this too, that he rooted for incompletions from both quarterbacks at the beginning of each Super Bowl so his record stays intact. Are you rooting for Caleb to not get the start maybe in week 18, Eric? Is that 38-38? He's 586 yards from breaking it.
Yeah. Well, I hope he does. And if he doesn't do it this year, he will eventually. What I find amazing about Caleb is we've talked about all the chaos he's gone through. If you just talk about the coaching staff, there's been a Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, gets fired. Not long after, Matt Eberflus gets fired. So that's the culture he's been operating in. Then there's, as we also talked about, all the ridiculous commotion going on with upper management. And yet he seems to have held this whole thing together. What I find more impressive than any yardage, whether he breaks it or not, the part that impresses me the most is how he's protected the ball. And he's gone, 5 or 6 games now without an interception. That doesn't happen to anybody. And so amidst all of that, he's been able to maintain his composure and with a kind of lack of leadership around him, in a way, he's become that. And I think he's given a good example to his teammates and coaching staff about how to handle adversity in the midst of it. And I think that's what's impressed me the most about him is that as the years go by, keep in mind, this is just year one.
You had the chance last year to go back to Detroit and be with some former teammates. Barry Sanders, my favorite athlete of the decade of the 90s. That didn't go over well in Chicago and in Jordantown, but and that was the first playoff win they enjoyed since you guys beat the Cowboys way back after the 91 season. Can they overcome these terrible injuries to Hutchinson, McNeil, and Montgomery the rest of the way and still win this thing?
Well, keep in mind, they've done it because prior to that, they had already lost half their team. And so they find ways. And that's, to me, the magic of Dan Campbell and that whole organization. They're kind of the opposite, right, of the Bears. Here, I thought they were kind of almost identical in a way, but that's proved not to be the case. And when you mentioned Barry, I like the fact that you've got a statue of him up behind you, and the but there's no Walter up there. And I'll share a cute little story. Is that when Griffin, my oldest son, Walter Payton was his favorite human being. After games, like later, like 97, 98, they would kind of hang out. Walter would come down and hang out outside the locker room. And Griffin and him would kind of goof off. And so there's a friend of mine, Roman Fortin, who played in Detroit, is from Ventura, not far from where I was living at the time. And Roman comes over, and they're getting in, Roman's, my age, whatever the age that was at the time. And Griffin was probably, I don't know, 10 or 11. And there's an argument going back and forth as to who was the greatest running back of all time. And finally, Roman says, "All right, if Barry and Walter were on the same on the team at the same time, Walter never would have saw the field." And Griffin was like, "What?" and
man.
But I think you're right. I think Barry, it was such a unique runner. Now, he could not have, at the time, it was, who was better, him or Emmitt Smith? And if Barry could have run behind that line, Barry couldn't have. That line, that was a zone scheme with, that's what we ran in Chicago. It was a zone scheme, it was Power O, and that wasn't Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders was the best 1-on-11 running back I've ever seen. And it might be the greatest 1 yard loss in history, because he would have made all but one guy miss. And he was getting, people were coming unblocked. And he'd get right as he's getting the hand up, unblocked, and they would never touch him. So, but I agree with you. I think Barry was just such a unique talent. Now, as an overall football player, I'd say there's no question Walter Payton was by far and away exceeded Barry, because he could block, he could catch, he could throw, and obviously he could run. He could run in any scheme.
Walter was my hero as a high school football player, and getting to know him a little bit over the years, man, just an incredible dude. Not a very happy guy, which I write about in I Bear Witness, which is on the way to Thousand Oaks, by the way. I did get to UPS yesterday, so it's on the way. That man, it's just like, I think that makes him more human more than any other superstar I've been around, because, he suffered from depression and addiction, and he was not faithful to Connie, and all this stuff was well documented. And people say, well, what's he so pissed off about all the time? You know what? No matter how famous you are, depression doesn't have prejudices, and neither does any other mental health issue. And Walter was 100% human, and I miss him so much. All the time I think about Walter.
Well, I think, you mentioned, him being a superstar, and of course he was, but long before he was a superstar, he was a young kid. And people are fallible. That's just the way it goes. And I think for people to acknowledge that makes them even more human. And because who doesn't suffer from depression or know someone that has? Who doesn't stumble themselves often? And so we're all in this, soup together, and making our way. And I agree with you. I mean, Walter was an amazing guy with flaws, like so many of us are and have.
Erik, a pleasure to catch up as always. I hope the book, The Ultimate Comeback, is doing well.
Yeah, yeah.
Writing books is hard, and then sitting down to write it again because you didn't see the head coach being fired for a second edition in the middle. They got to wait until I write a book to break a 104-year tradition of firing the guy. So I've got to update it for this break. Erik, have a great Christmas. Thanks a bunch. I'll catch you down the road, man.
Sounds good, Dan. Take care. Happy holidays to you.
Erik Kramer, one of my favorite guests who's ever worn a Chicago Bears uniform. And I want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year as well. Much more in the days ahead on the Bears as they continue to play out the string, and thanking everybody on the staff for making this possible. Randy Merkin is the guy who gets me all of these A-list guests for you. Thanking Merck and wishing him the best this new year, as well as Adam Delavitt, Baby Capone, Mons, my guy Brian Monzo helping out today out in the Apple. Alex Pastor and Troy Mocker do a great job, as does Sam Michael, my executive producer. Thank you for listening. I'm Dan McNeil.